red light filled the bridge before anyone said a word. I grabbed the edge of my console as the ship lurched, alarms screaming through every deck of the survey vessel Halcyon Drift. My hands were shaking, not from fear of the alarm itself, but from what the alarm meant. We had just entered a sector that no scout had ever properly mapped, a graveyard of broken hulls and frozen debris left over from a war so old that even our oldest archives had no name for it. "Report," snapped Captain Margot Lyle, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. I was the junior surveyor on this mission, barely 3 years into my service, and my chest tightened as I read the numbers scrolling across my screen. "Mass detected," I said. "Massive. Larger than anything in our database. It is not moving, Captain. No engine signature, no thermal output. It looks dead." Lyle stepped beside me, her 4 eyes narrowing as she studied the readout over my shoulder. She was Valkyrie, a species known for calm decision-making, but even she could not hide the flicker of unease crossing her face. "Define dead," she said. "No power signature anywhere along its hull," I answered. "No life support, no weapons charge. It has been sitting in this position for a very long time, judging by the ice buildup and debris clustering around it." The helmsman, a quiet young man named Felix Bryant, turned in his seat. "Could it be a station? An old outpost from before any of the recorded wars?" Light folded her arms. "Bring us closer. Slow approach. I want full scans before anyone gets excited." Excited was the right word, because the moment the object filled our main viewport, every single person on that bridge went silent. It was enormous, longer than 3 of our largest carriers placed end to end, its surface dark and pitted with age, covered in a thick layer of frost that sparkled faintly under our floodlights. Jagged plates of armor jutted out at strange angles, some torn, some scorched black, as if something terrible had happened to it long ago. Antennae arrays the size of buildings hung lifeless along its spine. There were no lights, no movement, no sound except the quiet hum of our own engines. "It is beautiful," whispered a voice from behind me. That was Grace Holloway, our xenoarchaeologist, a soft-spoken woman with sharp eyes who had spent her whole career dreaming of a discovery like this. "Look at the design. Nothing in our records matches this architecture." "It is also armed," Felix said quietly, zooming in on one of the jagged protrusions along the hull. "Or it used to be. Those look like weapon emplacements." "A defense station then," Lyle said. "Ancient, abandoned, possibly older than any civilization currently active in this sector." The bridge buzzed with quiet excitement. I understood why. In all the time I had served on survey ships, I had seen comet fields, dead stars, and the husks of long-forgotten colonies. I had never seen anything built on this scale. If this truly was an ancient station, it would rewrite everything we thought we knew about the early history of this region of space. "Initiate a full structural and material scan," Lyle ordered. "I want to know what we are looking at, before we even think about getting close enough to dock." The scan took nearly 20 minutes. I watched the data stream in, line after line of measurements, material composition, structural integrity readings, until finally a summary appeared on my screen. Estimated age, unknown, likely exceeding 10,000 years based on decay patterns. Material composition, unidentified alloy, far stronger than current standard hull plating. Power signature, none detected. Life signs, none detected. "It checks out," I said, though something about the numbers nagged at me. The decay patterns suggested age, yes, but the structural integrity was far too high for something that old. Whatever this thing was built from, it had not weakened the way it should have, after so many centuries adrift. "Captain," I said carefully, "the material strength does not match the estimated age. If this is truly 10,000 years old, it should be far more degraded." Lyle considered this for a moment. "Noted. Add it to the survey report. For now, we proceed with caution. Prepare a boarding team. Minimal personnel. I want eyes on this thing before any of the higher commands start fighting over who gets to claim it." That was how I ended up suiting up less than an hour later, my hands still trembling slightly as I checked the seals on my environmental suit. Grace stood beside me, practically glowing with anticipation, while Felix double-checked the small shuttle that would carry us across the gap between our ship and the silent giant waiting in the dark. Try not to touch anything you do not understand, Lyle told us over comms as the shuttle doors closed. And if anything at all, feels wrong, you call it in immediately. Understood? Understood, I said, though my voice came out quieter than I intended. The shuttle ride across was slow and deliberate, giving me far too much time to stare out the viewport at the structure growing larger and larger ahead of us. Up close, the scale of it became almost impossible to comprehend. What I had thought were simple hull plates turned out to be massive sections, each larger than our entire survey ship. Deep gouges ran along portions of the surface, scars from impacts or battles long since forgotten by history. In some places, the frost had cracked away to reveal a strange dark metal underneath, a material that seemed to absorb the light from our flood lamps, rather than reflect it. There, Felix said, pointing toward a section near what looked like the underside of the structure. I am reading a possible entry point. Looks like a damaged section of hull, large enough for the shuttle to dock directly inside. Take us in slowly, Grace said, practically pressed against the viewport now. I want to record everything. The shuttle eased through the gap in the broken hull plating, our floodlights sweeping across a cavernous interior space, unlike anything I had ever seen. Twisted metal beams stretched overhead like the ribs of some massive sleeping creature. Cables, long dead and frayed, hung loosely from the ceiling, swaying gently as our shuttle's thrusters disturbed the stale air still trapped inside. Atmosphere reading, Felix called out, checking his instruments. There is still breathable air in here, though the quality is poor. Pressure is stable, surprisingly. Whatever sealed this place kept it that way for a long time. That is unusual for something this old, I noted, my unease growing with every passing second. We docked the shuttle against a flat section of deck plating and stepped out one by one, our boots echoing strangely against the metal floor. The silence inside was heavy, almost suffocating, broken only by the soft hiss of our suits and the distant creak of metal settling somewhere deep within the structure. Grace immediately moved toward a section of wall covered in strange markings, her recorder already active. These symbols, she murmured. I do not recognize this language at all. The shapes are angular, almost mathematical in structure. I moved closer to examine them myself. The markings were precise, evenly spaced, clearly written by intelligent hands rather than carved by chance. Strange combinations of straight lines and curves, repeated in patterns across the wall, almost like a sequence of numbers or coordinates. Could be a warning, Felix suggested, or instructions. Hard to say without context. We continued deeper into the structure, our floodlights cutting narrow paths through the darkness. Corridors stretched out before us, wide enough for vehicles rather than simple foot traffic, lined with thick reinforced walls that bore the marks of old battle damage. Every few meters we passed openings that Grace identified as weapon mounts, long since drained of any power, their barrels pointed outward toward whatever threats this place had once been built to face. This is not a station, I said slowly, the realization settling over me like a weight. Stations are built for habitation, research, communication. This is built for combat. Look at the corridor width, the reinforced walls, the weapon placements every few meters. This was built to fight. Grace paused her recording, looking around with new eyes. You think it is a warship? I think it might have been, I said. A very, very old one. We pressed on, moving through chamber after chamber, each one revealing more strange technology, more unreadable markings, more evidence of a battle that had clearly taken place here long ago. Burn marks scarred the walls in several places. In one room, we found rows of what looked like storage pods, sealed and silent, their purpose unknown. It was Felix who found the chamber that changed everything. Over here, he called, his voice tight with something between excitement and unease. There is a sealed door. Reinforced, far thicker than anything else we have seen so far. We gathered around the door, our floodlights illuminating its surface. Unlike the rest of the structure, this section looked remarkably well preserved, almost untouched by the decay that covered everything else around it. There is a light, I said, pointing toward a small panel set into the wall beside the door. A faint, steady glow pulsed within it, barely visible, easy to miss if you were not looking directly at it. The room fell silent. That should not be possible, Grace whispered. Nothing in here has power. We confirmed that before we even boarded. Maybe it is residual, Felix offered, though his voice lacked conviction. Some kind of leftover charge that has not fully drained yet. I stepped closer to the panel, studying the soft pulse of light. It beat at a steady, even rhythm, almost like a heartbeat, slow and patient, as if something behind that door had simply been waiting. I do not like this, I said quietly. I think we should call this in before we go any further. Grace nodded, though I could see the reluctance in her eyes. This was exactly the kind of discovery she had spent her entire career searching for, and the temptation to push forward was clearly written across her face. Felix raised his wristcom to contact the halcyon drift, but before he could speak, a low vibration rolled through the floor beneath our feet. We all froze. The vibration came again, stronger this time, accompanied by a deep, resonant hum that seemed to rise from somewhere far below us, somewhere deep within the heart of the structure. The faint light on the panel beside the sealed door flickered, then steadied, then began to glow brighter than before. "Tell me that was the shuttle," Grace said, her voice barely above a whisper. Felix shook his head slowly, his eyes wide. That was not the shuttle. Somewhere deep within the silent giant we had called an ancient ruin, something was beginning to wake. The hum grew louder, vibrating up through the soles of my boots until I could feel it in my teeth. Felix took a step back from the sealed door, his hand instinctively moving toward the sidearm strapped to his hip, though we both knew it would do nothing against whatever was stirring beyond that wall. "We need to leave," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Now." Grace was still staring at the panel, her recorder trembling slightly in her grip. "Wait. Just a moment longer. I need to document this. This could be the most important." The lights came on. Not just the panel beside the door, but every light along the corridor we had just walked through, flickering to life one section at a time in a wave that rushed away from us into the distance. The dead silence that had filled this place for what might have been thousands of years shattered all at once, replaced by the groan of ancient machinery grinding back into motion. "Move!" I shouted, grabbing Grace by the arm and pulling her away from the sealed door. "Move now!" We ran. Behind us, the sealed door let out a sharp hiss, the sound of pressurized air escaping from seals that had not been broken in longer than any of us could imagine. I did not look back to see if it had opened. I did not want to know. The corridor that had seemed merely eerie on our way in now felt like a trap closing around us. Lights flared overhead in sequence, illuminating sections of the structure we had only glimpsed in shadow before, revealing details that made my stomach twist. The weapon mounts we had passed, the ones I had assumed were drained of all power, now pulsed faintly, with the same soft light that had glowed beside that sealed door. "Felix, talk to the ship," I gasped as we ran. "Tell them what is happening." Felix fumbled with his wristcom, his breathing ragged. "Halcyon Drift, this is the boarding team. We have a situation. The structure it is powering up. I repeat, the structure is active." Static crackled in response. Then Captain Lyle's voice came through, sharp with alarm. "Say again, boarding team. Confirm your status." "It is waking up," Grace cried out, her earlier excitement now replaced entirely with raw fear. "The whole thing is waking up." We rounded a corner and skidded to a stop. Ahead of us, a section of the corridor wall had shifted, sliding open to reveal a chamber filled with machinery that had clearly not existed there before, or perhaps had simply been hidden behind a wall, designed to look like the rest of the structure. Mechanical arms unfolded from recesses in the ceiling, their joints creaking with age but moving nonetheless, testing their range of motion in slow, deliberate arcs. "This way," I said, pulling Grace and Felix toward a side passage that led, as far as I could remember from our earlier path, back toward the breach where we had docked the shuttle. The deeper hum of the structure's core systems continued to build, joined now by a chorus of smaller sounds, the whir of fans pushing stale air through newly active ventilation systems, the click and clatter of panels shifting into new configurations, the distant groan of something massive rotating somewhere far below us. "Captain," Felix shouted into his comm as we ran, "we need immediate evacuation. The shuttle is our only way out. Please confirm you can see us." "We see you," Lyle's voice replied, tense but controlled. "Get to the shuttle. We are tracking a massive power surge, originating from the structure's core. Whatever this thing is, it is not dead anymore. We burst through the passage and back into the cavernous space where we had docked, relief flooding through me at the sight of our shuttle still sitting exactly where we had left it. But the relief was short-lived. Above us, sections of the ceiling that I had assumed were simply more twisted wreckage began to shift and realign. What I had mistaken for broken support beams were, in fact, retractable barriers, slowly sliding apart to reveal compartments full of dormant equipment, much of it now beginning to hum with the same soft light as everything else around us. "Get in the shuttle," I yelled, shoving Grace toward the open hatch. Felix, with me. We scrambled aboard, just as a low, resonant tone echoed through the entire structure, a sound so deep, it seemed to vibrate in my very bones. Felix slammed his hand against the controls, and the shuttle's engines roared to life as the hatch sealed shut behind us. "Go! Go! Go!" I shouted, though Felix was already pulling us off the deck plating, the shuttle lifting smoothly into the open air of the cavernous bay. As we rose, I caught sight of something through the side viewport that made my breath catch in my throat. Far below, near the center of the cavernous space, a massive section of flooring had split apart, revealing a brilliant glow of energy beneath, pulsing in slow, steady waves, like the beat of some impossibly large heart, finally returning to life after a long, long sleep. "What is that?" Grace whispered, pressed against the viewport beside me. "I do not know," I said, "and I do not want to find out." Felix guided the shuttle back through the breach we had entered through, out into open space, the dark hull of the structure falling away behind us as we accelerated toward the waiting form of the halcyon drift. I allowed myself a single breath of relief as our ship grew larger in the viewport ahead, its docking bay lights guiding us home. That relief lasted exactly as long as it took for the entire structure behind us to light up. It happened all at once, as if some final switch had been thrown deep within its core. Every visible surface of the massive hull blazed to life with a soft, steady glow, lines of light tracing along seams and panels that had been completely invisible just moments before, outlining a shape far more deliberate, far more purposeful than anything I had associated with a simple abandoned station. "Captain, are you seeing this?" I said into my comm, unable to look away from the sight unfolding behind us. "We see it," Lyle replied, her voice tight. "Get that shuttle docked immediately. All hands, prepare for possible withdrawal." The shuttle slid into the docking bay moments later, and the three of us practically fell out of our seats in our haste to reach the bridge. By the time we arrived, breathless and still shaking from the encounter, the entire crew was gathered around the main viewport, staring out at a sight that none of us could quite process. The structure we had called an ancient station, the one Grace had hoped would rewrite our understanding of history, was no longer simply glowing with reawakened systems. Sections of its hull were shifting, panels sliding open to reveal what could only be described as thruster arrays, dozens of them spread across its massive frame, each one beginning to flicker with faint points of light. "That is not a station," Felix said quietly, echoing the realization I had voiced earlier in the corridor. "Stations do not have engines. Sensors are picking up a massive buildup of energy across the entire structure," reported our communications officer, a sharp-eyed woman named Olivia Marsh, her fingers flying across her console. "Captain, I am also reading what looks like internal defense systems activating. Multiple turret arrays, all coming online." Lyle's expression hardened. "Pull us back. Maximum safe distance, now. I do not want to be anywhere near that thing when it finishes waking up." The halcyon drift began to reverse away from the structure, our engines straining as we put distance between ourselves and the awakening giant. I stood frozen at my console, watching the readings continue to climb, energy levels rising far beyond anything our scans had detected just hours earlier. "Grace," I said quietly, "those markings we saw, the ones you could not identify, do you think they were a warning?" She did not answer right away, her eyes still fixed on the viewport, watching the structure's transformation with a mixture of fear and reluctant fascination. "I think," she finally said, "we were not supposed to find this place while it was still sleeping." A new alarm began to sound across the bridge, different from the earlier alert, more urgent, more insistent. "Captain," Olivia called out, her voice rising with tension. I am picking up a structural shift across the entire object. It is, Captain. I think it is detaching from its position. Detaching from what position? Lyle asked sharply. It has been sitting motionless for thousands of years, according to our initial scans. I do not think it was ever truly anchored, Olivia replied. I think it was simply waiting. On the main viewport, the massive structure that had captured all our attention and excitement just hours earlier began to shift, slowly at first. Then with growing momentum, the dark mass of its hull rotating against the backdrop of stars, as if testing limbs that had not moved in an unimaginable length of time. I felt a chill run through me that had nothing to do with the temperature of the bridge. Felix, I said quietly, do the math for me. If that structure really has been sitting dormant for thousands of years, and it is now powering up and moving entirely under its own control, what does that tell us? He looked at me, his face pale beneath the glow of the console lights. It tells us that whoever built this thing built it to last, and built it to wait. Wait for what? Grace asked, though I suspected none of us truly wanted to know the answer. The structure's rotation slowed, then stopped, its massive bulk now oriented in a direction that made every instinct in my body scream danger. It was no longer simply powering up its systems at random. It was orienting itself, aligning, preparing. Captain, Olivia said, her voice barely above a whisper now. I am reading what looks like targeting sensors sweeping the area. I believe it is scanning us, all of us, every ship in the sector. Lyle's jaw tightened as she stared out at the awakening giant filling our viewport, its hull now blazing with light, its thrusters beginning to flare with the unmistakable signs of imminent movement. Whatever that thing is, she said slowly, I do not think we are looking at a relic anymore. I stood at my console, watching the readings climb higher and higher, feeling the weight of what we had stumbled into, settling over the bridge like a physical presence. We had come looking for an ancient mystery, a forgotten piece of history to study and catalog. Instead, we had found something that had simply been sleeping, patiently, silently, for longer than any of our recorded histories could explain. And now, it was awake. All ships, this is the Halcyon Drift, Lyle said into the fleet-wide channel, her voice steady despite the tension radiating from every line of her posture. We have an unknown contact powering up and beginning movement. I am ordering an immediate withdrawal to safe distance. Repeat, withdraw to safe distance and hold formation. Our survey mission had never traveled alone. 3 other vessels from the coalition had been assigned to this sector alongside us, each representing a different member species, each eager for a share of whatever discoveries this graveyard of old wreckage might offer. Now those same vessels scrambled to reposition, their engines flaring as they pulled back from the awakening giant at the center of our formation. I watched on the main viewport as the structure continued its slow, deliberate transformation. Sections of hull that had appeared fused shut by centuries of frost and decay now peeled open smoothly, revealing banks of thrusters and what looked unmistakably like weapon batteries, dozens of them, arranged with a precision that left no doubt about their original purpose. Olivia, do we have any communication attempts coming from the object? Lyle asked. Nothing yet, Captain, Olivia replied, her hands moving rapidly across her console. No hailing signals, no broadcast on any frequency we recognize. It is simply continuing its activation sequence. Sensors confirm full thruster ignition, Felix reported, his voice tight. Captain, that thing is generating enough output to move itself entirely under its own power. This is not some piece of drifting debris caught in a current. It has full propulsion control. A new voice crackled over the fleet channel, belonging to the captain of one of the other coalition vessels, a sharp-tongued commander named Henry Caldwell, representing the human contingent within our mixed fleet. Out of everyone present, his reaction carried a weight the rest of us did not immediately understand. Lyle, Caldwell said, his voice unusually quiet, I need you to pull your sensor logs and send me everything you have on that structure. Hull markings, material composition, everything. Why the urgency, Captain Caldwell? Lyle asked. There was a pause before he answered. Because some of what your boarding team described sounds familiar. Too familiar. I am sending you something now. Compare it against what you found. A data packet arrived on my console moments later, and I pulled it up alongside the images Grace had captured during our boarding mission. My breath caught as the comparison rendered on screen. The strange angular markings we had found near the sealed door, the ones none of us could identify, matched almost perfectly with a section of text displayed in Caldwell's file, a sample of old human script from centuries past, a style of writing that had largely fallen out of common use generations ago. "That cannot be right," Grace whispered, staring at the screen beside me. "Captain Lyle, the markings inside the structure, they match an early form of human written language." The bridge fell silent, except for the steady hum of our ship's systems, and the distant pulse of warning alarms, still cycling through their patterns. "Captain Caldwell," Lyle said slowly, "are you telling me that structure is of human origin?" Another pause, longer this time. "I am telling you it might be. There are old records, half-forgotten stories really, about vessels humanity built generations ago, during a period most of your archives probably do not even cover. Stories about ships designed to operate without crew for impossibly long stretches of time, sealed away and left waiting in remote sectors, as a precaution against threats that never fully arrived. Most of us assumed those stories were exaggerated, legends meant to intimidate rivals during an unstable period of human history." "And if they were not exaggerated," Lyle asked, "then we need to leave this sector immediately," Caldwell replied, his voice carrying a weight none of us had heard from him before. "Because if that thing really is what I think it might be, it was not built to simply patrol or observe. It was built to respond to threats with absolute and overwhelming force." The structure on our viewport shifted again, this time more dramatically, its massive bulk turning slowly to align with something none of us could immediately identify. Olivia's console chimed with a new alert, and her face paled as she read the data. "Captain," she said, "I am detecting active targeting sensors locking onto multiple points around the sector. It is not just observing us anymore. I believe it has classified all of our vessels as potential threats." "All ships," Lyle said immediately, her voice sharp with command authority. "Increase distance immediately. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage under any circumstances." The 4 vessels of our small coalition fleet scattered, engines burning bright as we pushed our systems beyond their normal operating parameters, in an effort to put as much distance as possible between ourselves and the awakening structure. I gripped the edge of my console, watching the readouts climb as our own engines strained against the sudden demand. Behind us, the structure's transformation reached its final stage. The soft glow that had spread across its hull intensified into a steady, confident light, illuminating details we had never been able to see clearly before. What had once looked like a chaotic mass of broken plating and scattered debris now revealed itself as a deliberate, purposeful design, every angle and curve serving some function we could only guess at. "It is fully active," Felix reported, his voice barely steady. "All systems online, engines at full output. Captain, that thing is no longer dormant in any sense of the word." "Status on the fleet?" Lyle asked. "All 4 vessels clear of the immediate area," Olivia replied. "Maintaining distance of approximately 200,000 kilometers and increasing." For a long moment, nothing happened. The massive structure hung in space, fully illuminated now, its true shape finally visible to us in its entirety. It was, beyond any doubt, a warship, built on a scale that dwarfed anything in our combined fleet, anything any of us had encountered in our recorded histories. Long, angular, bristling with weapon emplacements along every visible surface, it looked less like a relic from some forgotten age, and more like a predator finally stretching after a long, patient sleep. Then it moved. Not the slow, testing rotation we had witnessed earlier, but a deliberate, confident surge forward, its massive engines flaring with a brilliance that lit up the surrounding debris field like a second sun. The sheer scale of its acceleration defied everything I understood about vessels of that size, closing distance with a speed that should have been impossible for something so massive. "It is moving toward the debris field," Olivia called out, her voice rising with alarm. "Captain, I believe it is heading toward the wreckage near the eastern edge of the sector." On the viewport, we watched as the structure approached a cluster of old derelict ships, the remains of whatever ancient conflict had scattered this graveyard across the void centuries ago. For a moment, I thought it might simply pass through the debris field, perhaps continuing on some predetermined course, unrelated to our presence. Instead, a section of its hull opened, revealing a weapon array unlike anything our scanners could properly categorize. A brilliant beam of focused energy lanced out from the structure, striking one of the largest derelict hulks in the debris field with surgical precision. The old wreck did not simply absorb the impact. It vanished entirely, reduced to scattered fragments and drifting dust, in less time than it took me to draw a single breath. The bridge fell utterly silent. That was a demonstration. Caldwell's voice came through the fleet channel, quiet and grim. It is showing us exactly what it is capable of. Why would it target an empty derelict? Grace asked, her voice trembling slightly. There was nothing alive on that wreck, nothing it needed to defend against. Because it wanted us to see, I said, the realization settling over me with cold certainty. It is not attacking randomly, it is sending a message. As if confirming my words, the structure's massive form began to turn once more, its weapon array slowly tracking across the open space of the sector, sweeping past the scattered remains of the old battlefield, until it settled, with unmistakable deliberation, on our own small formation of ships. "Captain," Olivia said, her voice barely above a whisper, "it has us in its targeting sweep." Lyle's hands tightened on the edge of her console, her composure straining under the weight of the moment. "All ships, prepare for immediate evasive maneuvers. Olivia, open every channel you have. I want to attempt communication before anything else happens." Olivia's fingers flew across her console, broadcasting on every frequency our systems could generate, a desperate attempt to establish contact before the structure decided our fate for us. For several agonizing seconds, nothing came back but static. Then, finally, a response arrived. Not a voice, not at first, but a simple string of data that scrolled across Olivia's screen, a pattern that took our translation systems several attempts to properly decode. "Captain," Olivia said slowly, reading the translated text aloud. "It says, identification required, unauthorized presence detected within designated perimeter. Respond immediately, or be classified as hostile." The weight of those words settled over the bridge like a physical pressure. We had come to this sector believing we were exploring history, cataloging the remains of a war long since ended. Instead, we had stumbled directly into the path of something that considered this entire region still very much an active and contested perimeter. "Send a response," Lyle ordered, her voice tight with controlled urgency. "Identify us as a civilian survey mission. No hostile intent. Request peaceful withdrawal from the area." Olivia complied immediately, her hands steady, despite the obvious strain in her expression. The seconds that followed felt like hours, each one stretching out as we waited to see whether reason would prevail, whether whatever intelligence controlled that massive structure would accept our explanation. The reply came swiftly. "Acknowledged," Olivia read, relief flooding briefly into her voice, before the next words drained it away entirely. "Withdrawal authorized. However, additional unauthorized contacts detected entering sector boundary. Threat assessment escalating." "What additional contacts?" Lyle demanded, turning sharply toward the sensor station. Felix's console chimed urgently, new readings populating his screen faster than he could process them aloud. "Captain, I am picking up new arrivals on long-range sensors, multiple vessels, unknown configuration, approaching from the far edge of the sector at significant speed." I felt my stomach drop as the implications settled over me. We were no longer the only ones drawn to this graveyard of old wreckage, and whatever was now approaching, whatever those unknown vessels represented, the massive structure floating before us had already made its assessment clear. This sector belonged to it, and it was prepared to defend that claim against anyone who dared to challenge it. "All ships," Lyle said, her voice carrying the unmistakable edge of someone facing a decision with no good options remaining. "Brace for immediate departure. We are leaving this sector, and we are leaving now." But even as she gave the order, I could see on the viewport that the massive structure was no longer simply tracking us with its sensors. It had begun, slowly and deliberately, to move toward the new arrivals entering the edge of the debris field, its weapon arrays already charging with the same brilliant energy that had erased an entire derelict ship from existence moments earlier. Whatever those unknown vessels were, they had no idea what was about to meet them. The unknown vessels resolved into clearer detail on our long-range sensors as they closed the distance, and the moment Felix identified their configuration, the tension on the bridge shifted into something colder and more immediate. "Captain, those are raider ships," he said, his voice clipped. "Configuration matches reports we received last cycle about a group operating along the outer trade routes. Heavily modified, weapons far beyond standard civilian allowances." "Raiders," Lyle repeated, her jaw tightening. "Out here, in an unclaimed sector nobody was supposed to know about." "They must have tracked our approach," Grace said quietly. "Survey missions into unmapped regions sometimes attract that kind of attention. Easy targets, isolated, valuable cargo." I stared at the viewport, watching 6 raider vessels emerge fully from the haze of distant starlight, their hulls scarred and patched with mismatched plating, clearly built for speed and aggression rather than comfort or exploration. They had not come here for ancient history, they had come here for us. "They are hailing the sector," Olivia reported, her voice tense, broadcasting a general threat, demanding any vessels in the area power down and prepare to be boarded. "They have no idea what is sitting in the middle of this debris field," Felix said. He was right. The raider ships continued their approach, weapons charging, formation tightening, as they prepared to corner what they likely assumed were a handful of helpless survey vessels and their cargo. None of them seemed to notice, or perhaps simply did not care about, the massive structure now drifting silently at the center of the sector, its weapon arrays already tracking their movement with cold precision. "Should we warn them?" Grace asked, glancing toward Lyle. "Warn raiders who were about to attack us?" Lyle asked, though there was no real anger in her voice, only exhaustion and disbelief at the situation unfolding before us. Before anyone could decide on an answer, the massive structure acted. A series of brilliant beams lanced out from its hull, precise and controlled, striking 3 of the 6 raider vessels in rapid succession. Unlike the single derelict it had destroyed earlier as a demonstration, these strikes were calculated with surgical accuracy, disabling engines and weapon systems rather than obliterating the ships outright. Within seconds, 3 of the 6 attackers drifted helplessly, their power signatures flickering and fading. The remaining 3 raider vessels broke formation immediately, scattering in a desperate attempt to escape whatever had just attacked them. But the structure was faster, far faster than anything that size should have been capable of, its thrusters flaring as it adjusted course to intercept their retreat. "It is hurting them," Felix said, disbelief coloring his voice. "Captain, it is not destroying them outright. It is disabling their ability to flee." I watched in stunned silence as the structure systematically neutralized each remaining raider vessel, never delivering a killing blow, simply stripping away their ability to maneuver or fight back, until all 6 ships hung motionless in space. Caught within an invisible perimeter, the structure had clearly established around itself. "New transmission incoming," Olivia said, her voice tight. "Captain, it is addressing us directly this time." The translated text appeared across the main viewport for everyone on the bridge to see. "Hostile elements neutralized. Sector perimeter re-established. Unauthorized civilian presence detected. State purpose for entering this region." Lyle exchanged a glance with the rest of us before responding through Olivia's console. "This is Captain Margot Lyle, of the survey vessel Halcyon Drift, representing a coalition exploration mission. We entered this sector believing it to be unclaimed territory, unaware of any active perimeter or defense presence. We mean no harm, and request safe passage to withdraw." The reply came swiftly, the text scrolling across our screens with a precision that felt almost unsettlingly calm given everything we had just witnessed. "Sector classified as restricted defense zone under standing protocol. Records indicate no recent activity within designated patrol radius for an extended duration. Clarification required regarding current galactic timeline." "It wants to know what year it is," Grace said slowly, the realization dawning across her face. "Captain, I think it has been completely cut off from any outside information this entire time. It does not know how long it has actually been sitting here." Caldwell's voice crackled back over the fleet channel, quieter now, almost cautious. "Lyle, let me handle this part. If what I suspect is true, this requires someone with proper authorization to communicate on behalf of human interests." Lyle hesitated only a moment before nodding, even though Caldwell could not see the gesture. "Go ahead, Captain Caldwell." There was a long pause before Caldwell's transmission reached the structure, and I found myself holding my breath, waiting to see how this exchange would unfold. When his voice finally came back over our bridge speakers, it carried a formality I had not heard from him before, as if he were addressing something far older and far more significant than a simple piece of derelict technology. "This is Captain Henry Caldwell, serving under current Human Coalition authority, requesting identification and status report. Please confirm designation and original deployment date." The response took longer this time, several long seconds passing before new text appeared across our screens. Designation: Sentinel Class Autonomous Defense Platform. Registry number obscured due to data degradation. Deployment date recorded as part of Standing Defense Initiative established during a period of extended regional conflict. Current status: awaiting confirmation of conflict resolution and authorization to stand down from active perimeter defense. The bridge went utterly silent as the weight of those words settled over all of us. "It has been waiting this entire time," Grace whispered, "waiting for someone to tell it the war it was built for is over." "How long ago was that conflict exactly?" Lyle asked quietly, almost afraid of the answer. Caldwell's voice, when it came, sounded strained in a way I had never heard from him before. "If the records I am thinking of are accurate, that conflict ended generations ago, long before most coalition records even begin. This thing has been sitting out here, alone, fully operational, for far longer than any of us can properly comprehend. And it never received any signal telling it to stand down," I said, the full scope of the situation finally settling into place. "It just kept waiting, patrolling an empty sector that everyone else forgot existed." A new alert chimed across Felix's console, and his expression shifted from cautious relief to renewed alarm. "Captain, I am reading additional power fluctuations from the structure. Something is changing again." On the viewport, the massive vessel began to shift its orientation once more, its weapon arrays slowly retracting, the brilliant glow along its hull softening into something steadier and less overtly aggressive. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope that perhaps this encounter might end peacefully, that the structure, having received confirmation of some kind from Caldwell, might simply power down or withdraw entirely. That hope lasted only until the next transmission arrived. Conflict resolution status cannot be independently verified through available data. Standing protocol requires direct verification through authorized command channels before deactivation can proceed. Until verification is complete, this platform will continue active defense operations within designated perimeter. "It does not trust us," Grace said. "It wants confirmation from somewhere we cannot provide." "What kind of verification would even satisfy a system like that, after all this time?" Felix asked. "Any command structure that originally deployed it is almost certainly gone. Any authority it recognizes probably does not even exist anymore." Caldwell's voice returned, heavier now, carrying an undertone of genuine concern. "That is exactly the problem. If this platform refuses to stand down without verification from an authority that no longer exists, it has no logical reason to ever deactivate. It will simply continue defending this perimeter indefinitely, treating every new arrival as a potential threat requiring assessment." "Indefinitely," Lyle repeated. "Captain Caldwell, are you telling me we have just woken up a fully armed warship that intends to remain active and aggressive in this sector forever, simply because nobody can prove to it that the war it remembers is over?" The silence that followed was answer enough. I looked out at the massive structure still drifting at the center of the debris field, its disabled raider captives held motionless within its perimeter, its weapon systems fully charged and ready, despite the temporary lull in aggression. Whatever we had stumbled into, whatever ancient conflict had led to its creation and deployment, the consequences of waking it were only beginning to reveal themselves. "Captain," Olivia said quietly, breaking the heavy silence on the bridge, "incoming transmission, but this one is different. It is broadcasting on an open frequency, not directed specifically at us." "Broadcasting to who?" Lyle asked. Olivia's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her console. "To everyone, Captain. It is sending the same message across every channel within transmission range of this sector." The text scrolled across our main viewport, and as I read the words, a cold certainty settled over me that nothing about this encounter was going to end as simply as any of us had hoped. "Attention all vessels within transmission range. This sector is designated as an active defense perimeter under standing protocol. Unauthorized presence will be assessed and responded to according to threat classification. All parties are advised that additional sentinel platforms may be present within this and adjacent sectors, pending confirmation of operational status. Grace turned slowly to look at me, her face pale. Additional platforms, she repeated. It is telling every ship in range that there might be more of these things out there. I thought back to the stories Caldwell had mentioned earlier, half-forgotten legends about vessels built to wait indefinitely in remote sectors, sealed away as a precaution against threats that never fully arrived. If even a fraction of those old stories were true, if even a handful of other sentinel platforms existed somewhere across the wider region, then what we had encountered today was not an isolated incident. It was the beginning of something far larger. "Captain," Felix said quietly, his eyes fixed on the structure still looming on our viewport. "What do we do now?" Lyle did not answer immediately. She stood at the center of the bridge, staring out at the massive vessel that had spent untold generations sleeping silently in this forgotten corner of space, now fully awake and broadcasting a warning to every ship within range that the galaxy had just changed in ways none of us were prepared to understand. "We do exactly what it told us to do," she finally said. "We leave this sector, and then we make sure every coalition government understands exactly what we found out here today." As our ship began its slow withdrawal, I kept my eyes fixed on the structure until it shrank to little more than a distant point of light against the endless dark. Even from that distance, I could still feel the weight of its presence, patient and watchful, exactly as it had been for longer than any of us could properly imagine. We had come looking for the remains of an old, forgotten war. Instead, we had found proof that the war had never truly ended for everyone involved. The journey back to Coalition territory felt longer than any voyage I had taken before, even though the actual travel time barely exceeded 2 days. None of us spoke much during that stretch. Grace spent most of her hours reviewing the recordings from our boarding mission, searching for details she might have missed, while Felix ran diagnostic after diagnostic on our ship's systems, as if the act of checking and rechecking everything might somehow undo what we had witnessed. I spent that time staring at the data Caldwell had shared with us, the old fragments of human history that most coalition records barely acknowledged. Stories about a species that had once fought a war so destructive, so total, that they had built weapons designed to outlast their own civilization if necessary. Weapons left behind not as monuments, but as promises. Silent guardians, meant to wait however long it took for someone to confirm the fighting was truly finished. By the time we reached the Coalition relay station, orbiting the nearest inhabited system, word of our discovery had already begun to spread. Lyle had transmitted a full report ahead of our arrival, and the reaction from Coalition Command had been immediate and, frankly, overwhelming. "They want a full debrief the moment we dock," Olivia told us, as our ship approached the relay station, its massive ring structure glittering with the lights of dozens of other vessels, coming and going on routine business. "Multiple delegations are already requesting access to our sensor logs." "Of course they are," Grace muttered. "Everyone wants to know if there are more of these things sitting out there." She was not wrong. The moment we docked, a small crowd of officials and representatives from several coalition member species had already gathered near our berth, eager for any information we could provide. I had never seen so many different species crammed into a single corridor before, each one pressing for answers, each one clearly terrified by the implications of what we had found. The debrief itself stretched on for hours, conducted in a secure chamber deep within the relay station, attended by representatives from nearly every major coalition government. I sat alongside Grace and Felix, answering question after question about the structure, its weapons, its communications, while Caldwell occupied a seat near the front, fielding the bulk of inquiries directed specifically at the human delegation. "You are telling us," said one representative, a tall, severe-looking individual from a species I did not recognize, that this platform identified itself as part of a defense network that may include additional units scattered across unknown locations? "That is correct," Caldwell confirmed. "Based on the broadcast it sent across open channels, and based on what little verified history we have access to regarding this period, it is reasonable to assume similar platforms may exist in other remote, unclaimed sectors throughout this region, and possibly beyond it." A wave of uneasy murmurs rippled through the assembled delegates. "How many?" another representative demanded. "How many of these weapons are we talking about?" Caldwell's expression remained carefully neutral, though I could see the tension in his shoulders. Unknown. Historical records from that era are fragmented, deliberately so in many cases, due to the chaotic nature of the conflict that led to their deployment. It is possible there are only a handful. It is equally possible there are many more than that. The chamber fell into an uneasy silence, as the full weight of that uncertainty settled over everyone present. "And these platforms," the first representative continued, "they consider themselves still bound by orders given before any of our current governments even existed. Orders that none of us have any authority to rescind." "That appears to be the case," Caldwell said quietly. I watched the faces around that chamber shift through stages of disbelief, fear, and finally, a kind of grim acceptance, as the reality of our discovery sank in. For generations, the wider galaxy had operated under a quiet, comfortable assumption that humanity, whatever it had once been, whatever conflicts it had once been part of, was a relatively minor footnote in galactic history, a species that had faded into obscurity, its old territories absorbed or abandoned, its influence diminished to little more than scattered colonies and modest representation within the coalition. What we had found out in that forgotten sector suggested something very different. "Captain Caldwell," Lyle said carefully, breaking the heavy silence that had settled over the room, "is there any indication of how widespread this defense network might have been at the height of its deployment?" Caldwell hesitated before answering, choosing his words with obvious care. The conflict that led to the creation of these platforms was, by most surviving accounts, one of the most extensive and devastating in recorded human history. If even a portion of the old records are accurate, the defense network established during that period could have spanned dozens, possibly hundreds of sectors across a significant portion of explored space at the time. The room erupted into a flurry of overlapping voices, delegates turning to confer urgently with their advisors, the careful diplomatic atmosphere of the debrief dissolving into something closer to barely controlled panic. I sat quietly amid the chaos, my mind replaying the moment that sealed door had begun to glow, the slow, patient pulse of light that had seemed so insignificant at the time. We had assumed we were looking at the remains of something long dead, a curiosity to be studied and catalogued. Instead, we had stumbled upon proof that an entire network of similar guardians might still exist, scattered throughout the galaxy, each one waiting in patient silence for confirmation that a war fought generations ago had finally come to an end. A confirmation that, as far as any of us could tell, no living authority remained capable of providing. "What happens now?" Grace asked quietly, leaning toward me as the debrief continued to spiral into heated debate among the assembled delegations. "If there really are more of these platforms out there, and none of them will stand down without proper authorization, what does that mean for the rest of us?" I did not have an answer for her. None of us did. Later that evening, after the formal debrief had finally concluded, and the various delegations had dispersed to relay urgent reports back to their respective governments, I found myself standing alone, near a viewport, overlooking the relay station's docking ring, watching ships come and go against the backdrop of distant stars. Grace joined me a few minutes later, her expression thoughtful, rather than fearful, for the first time since we had fled the awakening structure. "You know," she said, "for most of my career, I dreamed about finding something like that. Something ancient, something that would force everyone to rewrite what we thought we understood about the past." "Did it feel the way you imagined it would?" I asked. She laughed softly, though there was little humor in it. "Not even close. I imagined dust and silence and old secrets waiting patiently to be uncovered. I never imagined the secret itself would still be armed and capable of deciding, all on its own, whether the rest of us deserved to live, or simply qualified as a threat requiring assessment." I thought about the soft, steady pulse of that light beside the sealed door, the patient rhythm of something that had simply been waiting, undisturbed, for longer than entire civilizations had existed and faded. I thought about the calm, measured way it had disabled the raider vessels without destroying them outright, the careful precision in every action it had taken, even as it demonstrated exactly how easily it could have chosen far more severe outcomes. "It was not mindless," I said slowly. "It was not some ancient curse or chaotic force lashing out at anything that came near it. It made choices. It assessed threats individually. It tried to communicate before resorting to force. "Does that make it more comforting or less?" Grace asked. I considered the question for a long moment, watching the lights of passing ships reflect off the curved viewport in front of us. "Less," I finally admitted, "because that means whoever built it trusted it enough to make those decisions on its own, indefinitely, without requiring constant oversight. That is not the kind of trust you place in a simple weapon. That is the kind of trust you place in something built to last forever, exactly as intended." 3 days later, additional reports began trickling in from other coalition survey teams operating in distant, unrelated sectors. Reports of strange, dormant structures, discovered scattered throughout regions previously dismissed as empty or insignificant. None of them had yet shown signs of activation, but every single discovery sent a fresh wave of unease rippling through coalition leadership. Caldwell found me in the relay station's observation lounge during one of the rare quiet moments between briefings, his usual sharp confidence replaced by something more contemplative. "You held up well out there," he said, settling into the seat across from me. Most junior surveyors would have frozen completely in a situation like that. "I am still not entirely certain I have processed everything that happened," I admitted. He nodded slowly, his gaze drifting toward the viewport and the distant stars beyond. "None of us have, honestly. We spent generations treating humanity's old conflicts as ancient history, something safely buried in the past with little relevance to the present. Turns out some of those old conflicts simply went quiet rather than truly ending." "Do you think there are more of them?" I asked. "More platforms like the one we found?" Caldwell was quiet for a long moment before answering. "I think the galaxy just learned an important lesson today. Just because something looks ancient and silent does not mean it is harmless. And just because a war seems to have ended generations ago does not mean every reminder of it has finished waiting." I thought back to that final transmission, the warning broadcast across every channel within range, advising all parties that additional Sentinel platforms might exist within adjacent sectors pending confirmation of operational status. At the time, it had felt like a simple statement of fact, a piece of procedural information delivered without emotion or intent to intimidate. Now, sitting in the quiet observation lounge with the weight of everything we had learned settling fully over me, it felt like something far more significant. Not a threat, exactly, but a quiet, patient reminder that the galaxy's comfortable assumptions about the past were about to be tested in ways none of us were fully prepared for. Somewhere out there, scattered across countless forgotten sectors, more silent guardians might still be waiting, exactly as patient, exactly as capable, exactly as certain in their purpose as the one we had so carelessly awakened. And until someone found a way to convince them, beyond any doubt, that the war they remembered was truly finished, they would simply continue waiting, indefinitely, ready to respond the moment anyone dared to test the boundaries of a perimeter most of the galaxy had long since forgotten even existed. I closed my eyes and pictured that soft, steady pulse of light beside the sealed door one final time, patient and unhurried, exactly as it had been for longer than any of us could properly comprehend. It had not been a relic. It had been a promise. And promises like that, I was beginning to understand, did not simply fade away with time. They waited, silently, patiently, for as long as it took.